Hello. In today's demonstration, we're going to be working with texture. And with that texture, we are going to be using your gesso. And I'll show you what gesso is in a bit. But first, what you see here is some things that I found around the house and around the outside, my backyard, to help me make some texture. And more importantly, to help us make some random texture that we have to work with. You can find pretty much anything that you can around the house that you think can use texture. Maybe after this demonstration, you'll see what I'm using them for and how I'm going to be using them. But again, it's just an array of different types of things that I can easily press or trowel or scrape onto paper to create some interesting texture and movement. Gesso is not paint. It's kind of a thicker kind of primer quality than paint. So you are going to want to find objects that you don't have to worry about, or that you are okay with putting paint on or putting any type of material. So make sure that your objects are disposable and nothing that is too precious. But what I found are just some interesting outside right now. It's fall, so we have some great leaves out there. They're nice and dry. Here's just a regular nice big leaf. Here's a bamboo leaf that I think that can create some good texture or imprinting. Another leaf here. I want to use some straight lines, so I just got a nice straight stick so I can possibly make some interesting kind of geometrical textures that I could use. I have some mechanical kind of things here. This is a big screw here that I can hopefully roll and get some interesting texture or pattern. So I want you to think about something to get pattern. I have some just typical bolts and screws here that have some interesting hexagon shapes that I may be able to use. Again, you know, I might use them, I might not, but again, I'm just showing you examples that you can find around that you could use. I have an interesting wasp nest here with some nice geometry that I might be able to do some imprinting to get some interesting hexagonal shapes. So that's a cool thing. I have some black burlap or just any type of burlap that maybe I can lay onto. Again, remember your gesso is going to be a little thicker, so you know it's going to be kind of a fun, messy assignment. But again, you know that's what's cool about art, is that you know we can really have fun. So a nice piece of burlap could be interesting. Maybe you have something like some old lace that you could use that can maybe create some interesting patterns. Again, remember, we're pretty much, you know, ruining some of these materials, but that's okay. So make sure they're just something that you can dispose. I have just a piece of shag carpet here that that I had that maybe I can create some pretty rough texture. Again, some of the pieces may work, some of them may not work. So I don't want you to worry about it. Again, it's about experimenting right now, because texture really is something that we could use, but a lot of times to try to create good texture, you have to experiment. You have to really create or get ideas from some practices like we're going to be doing right now to really kind of achieve really good, unique texture, instead of kind of just finding a filter or just finding something that already exists. How do we create texture? Again, I'll create our own texture. And this is the way a lot of artists have been doing it for a long time. Here I have a piece of scrub, that green scrub stuff, and you can cut this into different shapes. So I have my scissors here ready to go, so I can cut this into an interesting shape, very similar to kind of what you might have done when you were a kid. You know, a lot of art, it really is still invented that way. Is tapping into that kind of innocent experimentation and innocent discovery and that attitude, because that's going to help us later on. An old brush here, so I can really create some interesting brush tones, but with some good you know, random kind of a brush mark. So a good old dry brush. You know, you can even cut, you know, some gaps or some negative space in your brush to do something else. Piece of foam here that I thought that might be interesting for some pattern or for some interesting texture. So a pattern, steel wool. You know, this was something I just grabbed. I thought it might be helpful, so I'm going to see what this does. But you know, everybody might have some steel wool hanging around. To get some geometry here, again, I have my straight edge here, but I got a little yogurt cup here that I figure I can maybe move some gesso to create some arches or to create some crescents. you know, or just some circles, okay? And I have another little plastic thing here that I might be able to make some squares along with the circles. And, you know, lastly, just a good piece of wood here that has a rough side. You know, there's a grain on this nice old piece of cedar here. So, you know, I don't know if it's going to work, but again, just have some things ready to go, you know. And again, remember, make sure it's stuff that, you know, you don't mind ruining or mind kind of altering with some paint. You're also going to need 3 sheets of your sketchbook paper that are already ripped out, and you can see how I already have 1 sheet ready to go, taped down, and that's what we'll start. We'll start next. So I've moved all my things, all the materials that I found. I moved those to the side, and what I have now is I have some water. Okay, I got my rinsing bowl here in case I need it. I have a pitcher of water here, and I also have my gesso. Now your gesso might be different than mine because they have all types and different brands. Mine is a pretty thick gesso. Yours might be a little thinner, but still you can pretty much use it the same way. Gesso is not paint. Gesso is more of a primer. It is a paint, but it's more of a primer paint that contains some silica or some carbonate in there, some calcium carbonate, which is basically kind of a young stone or a plaster, which is used on to primer canvases. It's used to primer almost anything. You can put gesso on most material, and it create a good surface for you to draw on or paint on. Gesso is what you should have. And they sell that at any art supply store. Again, you don't need the big container. You buy what you need to buy. And also, I have some charcoal here that I'm going to be using first, because we want to lay down a little bit of tone underneath, so we can kind of start to separate the gesso, which is going to be white, over maybe some gray tones. So I want you to really just, you know, think about just some random maybe movements, maybe some tonal variations. You can take as much time as you want. You can get it as dark, or you can get as much detail as you want. So what I'm going to do here is just, you know, start with the vine charcoal here, and maybe kind of do a kind of a simple pattern here, very bold line here. Turn my charcoal sideways and just start off with something pretty simple for now. Remember, we're just really just creating, you know, a simple background in order for us to be able to get a little bit of a tone in the background, because that gesso will start to move that charcoal a bit. I'm going to do a little bit more here. I got some compressed charcoal here. Let me go ahead and do a little bit of a mark making in between. Again, it's really up to you what you are wanting to do or what you can do. And I got 2 tones here. Here's going to be a little bit different. I'll just put a line, a bold line in between here. Okay, maybe a little bit of, again, you know, really just lay down some charcoal in an interesting way. Okay, that's going to be number 1. All right, lay that to the side. And I want you to think about, you know, maybe a different pattern, okay, a different direction. I like the side mark that it creates, so I'm going to go ahead and approach a similar pattern, but different. Okay, I kind of like that one. I'm going to keep that one just like that. Okay, lay that one to the side here, and I'm going to do one more. I'm going to go a little bolder this time. Okay, and possibly do some, let me see, some interesting, I've got my compressed charcoal now. Try some more of a grid. Let me stagger them. Again, you can do whatever you want. Make sure I go off the page with that one. Okay. And again, you know, these are kind of good exercises in order to, again, invent new textures, patterns, because when you only have a we don't have a plan, when you don't have a plan, sometimes the instinctual movement that you will create without that plan will create some good opportunities for investigations, and good doors will open up. Some great doors can open up. Let me go ahead and maybe do a little of tonal smoothing here. And it's also going to influence what you do with the gesso. Instead of just starting on a blank sheet, since gesso is white, it'll be hard to see. So this gives us a little bit of a little bit of information to have to work with. Okay, so let me go ahead and zoom out a bit. We can just see what I've done. And you can see how I have 3 different patterns. So I want you to do 3 different patterns. Okay, try some compressed charcoal, try some vine charcoal. You can even go in with some detail with your charcoal pencil. I mean, if you get involved with this first part of the process, we'll go right ahead. There's really nothing you can't do. Okay, so I have my first charcoal drawing down, and I'm going to start there. And you can start in whatever sequence that you wish. Of course, you can start with the first one or the last one or whatever. But before I start, I want to look at some of the objects that I found, and kind of, before I decide to do any gesso work, think about, what shapes or what objects work well with that simple drawing that you did. Okay, so I'm going to do some brush work with my rough brush here. I think this leaf might look interesting if I can get something in the center. I also didn't mention that I do have a palette knife here that is available at all art supply stores, and it's really for oil painters that can move oil paint around and mix paint, but we can use it to make some shapes and also to kind of trowel the gesso where we need it. So if you have that, or just any type of putty knife or scraper would work. But things that I'm choosing here that will work, but there's things that aren't going to work. So this is more of a kind of a simple pattern, but there's some organic form. I have some bubble wrap here that I don't think will work, because that's more of a kind of a geometric matrix system. That would work better when I move over to my grid here that I did a little bit more work on. Even the burlap, I'm thinking, would work better for that. So you can just see how I'm just making some decisions with what material I found worked better with the background that I did on the paper. So I'm going to stick with the leaf here. I think I'm going to use some brush work, and then I might even try to do a little bit of maybe some of this wood texture. So I'm going to keep it simple first, and then maybe try the more weirder objects, like, I'm not going to ruin this so fast. I want to really see what the gesso does first before I go into kind of doing something more delicate work like this. So I've made my choice. Let me go ahead and lay some gesso down. So I'm going to go ahead and use my palette knife. You can use your brush or whatever, but I'm going to go ahead first, and I have a good amount here that I want. Let me go ahead and zoom in here so you can kind of see. All right. And you're going to see how that gesso is going to mix a little bit with that charcoal. So, and don't worry about it. Remember, there's nothing that can go wrong here, because you can always do it again. You have more paper, and you have more gesso. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to kind of, work with the shape here. Let me see. I'm going to work with this interior shape first. Okay, I'm going to get rid of a little bit of gesso, maybe not too much. Now, you see, you'll notice if you got some good thick gesso that, you just with the palette knife work, right? You're creating some sort of texture. Remember, actual texture is when material is actually raised off of the surface. And when that dries, that's going to get a little bit more transparent. So, you can count on things changing a bit as you are working. Okay, so I'm going to keep that there for right now. Okay, make sure I put things that I want in my things that I want to wash off in my water. And let me go ahead and first do a little bit of brush work. Again, I'm going to start simple first. Okay, so let me see what happens when I, lift up a bit on the edges. Okay, we'll do a little zoom in here. Hopefully you'll be able to get a little bit of that texture. Okay, I'm going to go on to the edge here, spread that out a bit. You see, it's kind of moving that gesso, just that charcoal just a bit. And these little subtle things here are great, you know. As simple as this is, you know, it can create a real nice image. It's really just knowing how to use symmetry and use some basic elements of composition. Okay, now I'm going to stop there a little bit. You zoom out. Okay, so you can kind of get a sense of how that's looking. You know, so I kind of have this thing that's kind of, you know, this box that's kind of fanning out. Okay, let me go ahead and do a little bit of let me grab my stick here. Maybe I can outline this box again. Okay, just use my stick. Maybe just do a little movement in. You know, I don't know. It might work. It might not work. We'll see what happens. Okay. Again, it's texture, so if you don't see it immediately, don't worry about it. You always want to tread lightly. Okay, I see a little bit of that corner edge coming out. All right. Okay. You know, there's a little something happening there. Let me see if I can put a little light. There we go. So, you know, I have a kind of a square. I have something interesting happening, fanning out with some interesting texture there. Okay, I have a damp rag over here that you might hear my voice. Okay, now I have something happening. I kind of like that. Okay, now let's get that leaf over here. Here's kind of the moment of truth. Let me go ahead and add a little bit more gesso in the center, just so I have enough. Again, it all depends what you're going to be doing. And you'll see that when I do these demos, I'm making decisions as well, you know, just like how you would be. You know, none of this stuff can be pre-planned here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do a little bit. I'm going to use the side with a little bit more of the ribbing here. Again, a dryer. And I'm going to add a little gesso. Because if I lay that over, I'm not going to see kind of what's on the top over here. Okay, I'm going to add a little gesso to my leaf. Maybe I'll get a bit of you know, stuff like this is great, you know. You know, you never know what's going to happen. Okay. I mean, you could even use your handprint, your palm print. That could be really interesting. Okay, so now I have my leaf here. Let me see what happens now when I lay that down. You know, could be good, could be bad. Doesn't matter. Okay, I'm going to let that sit there a bit. And I think that, you know, when you're doing something like this, even though it does seem, you know, like you're stepping back in time a little bit when it comes to, you know, activity, you know, seems like, wow, you know, I did this when I was a kid. You know, you're an adult now, so try your best to consider some formal elements that we've talked about in the past, because you know, it is the same action, it is the same decision making that you were doing as a child, but now you have some formula that you can add to it, right? Okay, now let me see what happens here. Okay, as I lift. Okay. All right. I'm going to zoom in there. Okay. Now that there's something going on there that I really enjoy. Okay. Kind of moved some of that gesso in an interesting way. I didn't get a lot of the leaves, but I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. I think I'm going to see what happens with that and then continue on with the rest of it. Okay, let me zoom out a little bit here. Okay. All right, now I got a lot of gesso on here, so let me see what happens if I come to this corner here. Again, just see what happens. Doesn't matter. Not much I can do there just yet because I want that to dry I'm gonna let that dry for a bit, and then I'm gonna move on to the next one. Okay, so here is my first fast little texture, and it might be hard to see, but I'm gonna zoom in here, and I'll do a little bit of shadow work, and you can see how I'm having a slight pattern, or a slight kind of outer edge information of a leaf, but I kind of like that it has this kind of flame-like interior in the center that I think I can do something with, and so I'm going to leave that because that gesso should stay there. It might shrink a little bit, and I got a little tip there, but then again, remember, you know, we're trying to create new texture, right? So it's in there, so I'm going to accept it because that's just my first one. Okay, and I want you to do the same thing. Don't worry about if it doesn't work out as planned the first time. Okay, I want you to experience what happened and to be able to look at what happened. As long as it's textural, right? And as long as, again, you are having fun doing it and observing like I'm doing and playing with some shadow, right? And trying to see what are the possibilities. So on to my second here. What I've decided to go with on this one is I have my large screw here that I think I can get some interesting lines in the opposite direction. Since this is a very rhythmic pattern, I think something more straight, something more geometric, straight edge would work. Then I got this large circle here, my yogurt cup, that I think I can make some interesting circles here. And then again, remember, you might change, you know, you might start adding some gesso and grab something else because something happens with the way that gesso is laying or whatever. So you know, you'll always end up probably adding something different or something new, or editing out, you know, either or. With this one, I'm going to go ahead and just do a complete cover here. Again, I'm still using my palette knife here. You could easily do this with the brush. Okay, but I want to lay a little thick layer in there. Okay, I'm going to cover this whole thing, and let's see what happens. Again, you'll see that charcoal will bleed through when it dries a little bit. Okay, so let me go ahead and cover this. Still paying attention to the way I'm trialing. I'm not really worried about going all the way to the edge on this one because I kind of like that separation from the paper, and then of course to that edge. Okay, I'm good there. All right, let me do a little zoom in here. Okay, now let me see what happens first when I add a little bit of some line here. Let me see what direction. I think the opposite direction is as opposite as it can get. Okay, wow, I'm liking that a lot. Okay, yeah, that's interesting. Okay, let me do that again. Let me go the whole way. I mean, it's almost so easy, but you know, very effective. Okay, so that's number 2. Go all the way up. Yeah, I'm liking that a lot. Okay. Again, I can kind of see a little bit of that charcoal underneath, and I'm really enjoying that. I mean, sometimes it's, you know, you don't need much. Again, like I said, you know, you'll edit your decisions as well as, you know, your materials that you're using. Okay, I'm still going to go in with the circle here to see what happens with this. Okay. Just do a little bit of movement, so maybe I get an edge. Okay, not too bad. Breaks up that pattern of lines. Okay. It's amazing how much more controlled this pattern is in comparison to my first leaf pattern, which was very had a lot more noise, if that's one way of explaining it. Okay, this is looking pretty good. I'm enjoying this. Go up here, maybe a little bit. All right. Now, you know, you have to make decisions here in you know, when to stop. But let me go ahead and do a little shadow work here. You can definitely see that I do have some pretty interesting things happening, and I'm okay with that. I'm gonna let that sit here. Again, this will dry. You can always add more pattern after that dries. You know, you can layer gesso on top of each other since it has a large silica base. A large kind of silica comes like a sand, right? It'll lay and stack on top of each other, so you can build it. Okay, so you know, when you make your decisions, if you like that and you don't know what to do next, stop, let it dry, come back to it, and maybe there's more you can add. Okay, that's number 2. On to number 3. Here is the frontal view of texture number 2, and you can see as I'm trying to create some shadow on top of it, and you can see I think this one's a pretty successful one. Again, when that dries, hopefully my charcoal will show through. Okay, again, let it dry, and then maybe you can come back and add more. So on to my third one. I've decided again to use my burlap, and I'm going to see what I can do with my bubble wrap. And I might see, you know, might throw in, you know, something interesting or some rough texture if it comes out with my Brillo pad here. But first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to cut my burlap into shape here. Put that up there. Okay, yeah, that should do it. Okay, paying attention to maybe some negative space, and I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to use my rough brush, right? I'm going to see if I can, what happens when I compress it through the screen or through the burlap. Again, you know, I mean, once you once it happens, you kind of have to live with it. So that's what's great about projects like this. It just forces a certain amount of intuition that all artists use and need to learn how to use. The intuitive decisions that really come out of nowhere, you know. And a lot of people think that you have to be special to have this type of intuition or these types of intuition that the artist has, and it's really not true. Everybody has it. But it's activity like this and practice like this that I think can help, you know, help that part of you come out. Okay, moving to the top here, making a decision to leave some negative space in between. I might be able to use these burlap pieces here as well after I'm done for something that I can draw on. Do a little zoom in here. Okay. Really trying to compress it through. Again, you know, you're going to be doing something different, but you might have some burlap or some lace. Maybe an old shirt that you can pick up somewhere. You never know. But make sure it's porous enough, or at least it's a loose enough weaving to. Okay. Now, if that doesn't work, I can just turn it over and, you know, press it with the part that I brushed on. So, okay. I'm going to go ahead and interesting. Okay, that's one. There's two. Again, that will dry. Okay, we'll set this to the side. All right, take a look at that first before I do anything else. It's pretty interesting. Okay, got a little bit of interesting, right? I don't know if I want to touch those too much. I like what's happening inside these little cell structures. So I might have to switch my decision up a little bit. Okay, and let me see. I might not do the bubble wrap just yet, unless I can. Okay. See what happens when I do a little bit of this. A little bit amount here. Okay. Okay, maybe over here a little bit. Okay, I am getting some slight, subtle circles that could be useful. I'm just not doing very much though. Okay, just a little bit. There we go. Seems to work better when I don't have a lot. Okay. All right. Set that to the side. Okay. And I think I'm going to go ahead and let that be, because I kind of like what's happening. I mean, I like just a little bit of these kind of segmented circles, and of course the screen, and then I got the background larger grid. I think I can work with that. Okay, so here is the frontal view of my third texture. And as you can see how I'm trying to work as much with that background, and I want you to do the same thing too. There's some good things happening. There's some good randomness, but some interesting pattern. I like the gradient. It almost looks like a old school Xerox copy right here. I mean, I can imagine doing that on just a full sheet of black paper and get some interesting kind of, almost old bleeded out pixels. But anyways, you can definitely see that there's something interesting happening that I could use. And I want you to see what happens now. What I'm going to do now is go back to my original, right, and see if I can add some more texture, or if there's things that I want to do to change it or add more pattern. But you probably should wait till they dry. So I'm going to wait till they dry and then come back on top of them and see if there's anything I want to add, whether it's moving around charcoal, whether it's adding more charcoal or adding more gesso or adding more texture. So here is my first pattern and texture, and you can see it's still drying, but I've decided to add a little bit more charcoal around the corners here so I can finally get to use my wasp nest. So I'll just darken in these areas around the corner here, so maybe I can focus in a little bit more. The composition will focus more into the center if I add some contrast around. So I'll do this and then we'll see what happens. Remember, I added a little bit of gesso here for that leaf on this corner, but I might have to cover that one up. I can see that it's bringing out the brush marks a lot more when I add some of that contrast in that background. I added some vine charcoal to the top of this layer so I can move it. Remember to mix your charcoals to really let them move around. So I've really darkened in that background quite a bit. I have my charcoal pencil here too that I might use to see if I can get a little outline of that edge of that leaf, just so I can help it out just a bit. So see how that looks. I want it kind of rough. Again, I'm not going right onto it. I'm going right on over the edge, just so I can. And you might want to add some, you might not. Again, what's nice about art like this is that it can continue to evolve for days. I mean, you can do the gesso one day and next day come and take a look at it and see if you want to add a little bit more charcoal. Trying to get a kind of a random line, so you see me kind of twisting. And okay, yeah, I like that. So you see how that line isolated that center textural point. So something that simple can really help it out. So you know, I have some interesting brush marks with that charcoal. It's kind of haloing out from the center. So I'm enjoying this, even though, you know, it's like I said, it's all just a process, and you know, your intuition will guide you. But next, what I want to do is see if I can utilize this here wasp nest around these edges. So I'm gonna do a little zoom out here. Maybe you can get a better look. Okay, I'm gonna add a little bit to the corner here, not too much. Okay. Again, you know, I don't know what's gonna happen. Okay, go ahead and you see what happens when I add it here. Maybe you have a wasp nest surrounding. Okay, this side. So you have to try, you have to be delicate with it, because, okay. I only have a few presses with something like this, so I have to make them count. Okay. I think I'm done. Okay, here are my 3 finished textures on my 3 different background charcoal drawings. And I think that, you know, I have some good ideas with what has happened here, especially kind of in this area here. I really do enjoy what's happening with these cells and this simple overlapping. You know, they kind of look like boxes, but also look like orbs. So I can see, a lot of different pieces of work that I can make with this, just a single idea. The centerpiece, I do enjoy also how that turned out. I was a little worried about that first initial pressing with the leaf, but after I outlined it and helped out that contrast with that variety of line and that separation, right, of that boundary, this really does play a nice role there. I'll do a little shadow working in a bit. This here also, I like how that created a foreground, almost like you're immersing from this wasp nest into this, form, this leaf form, but it also just creates kind of an entity, kind of a just form, just glowing in the background. I like the way that kind of separates. These bars in the background too really play a nice role that creates a little background there. And some symmetry. It splits the composition nicely, just subtly too. And over here, this is very simple but effective. I mean, it's not unlike just construction kind of systems of drywall, but still effective, especially with that underneath charcoal. I can see when that dries, that's going to expose itself a little bit more. It's still wet, so when that dries, that I can use that. If I were to brush some charcoal over that, that would come out a little bit more prominently if I lay charcoal over this kind of this gridded line texture here. But I want to keep it that way. I want to keep it kind of clean, because again, what we're doing here is learning how to develop ideas. And this particular system here is texture, right? But again, when you work this way, you can definitely take from segments of your processes here, and then again, those can be seeds that then can flourish into larger pieces of work, even series of work. So again, remember, these are ways that we can catch ideas with these processes. I'm going to do a little shadow work here, and let's see what if the sun starts to set And that shadow should come out just a little bit more. There it is. Again, doing these types of things in your own environment, shutting off all your lights and having a candle light next to it to see how that can affect some of the shadow. But this is part of the process, right? Is to look and to play, right, with some possibilities. So you can see how those shadows really are more prominent when you are working with different light angles. So I really hope you had fun playing with texture. I hope you had fun finding some objects that you can then use as support structures to help you gain ideas. You know, the randomness of the objects around them. Nature can provide us some great things that we could use. So let's see what you find. Let's see how you approach your gesso, and let's see what kind of forms and textures we can create. That then again, remember, just to create more work. Again, we're not really looking for a specific thing here. We're just trying to learn how to catch ideas, and in this situation, how do we play with texture? Okay, thank you.